Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Fathers Guild podcast. And this is a really special episode for me. This is actually the first ladies I've had on the podcast, lady, and then potentially ladies if Mary Flo decides to join us. But I think the thing that I'm really excited about is this conversation that we're about to have, because who I have with me is Megan from the Birds and the Bees, and Mary Flo might join us as well. And they're an Instagram account and service and free guides and course and stuff in between around how to talk to your kids about sex and sexuality. I think mainly sex, but in my experience of it all and going through her account and looking at pieces, it's super practical. And I think that that's what's huge to me is like, it's not big ethereal questions that go super deep. It's literally like, these are the things you say, these are the things you do to make this a conversation that sets your kids up for success. So I just wanted to introduce Megan and say thank you so much, Megan, for joining us on the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad we connected, and so much of what we do is for parents, but so much of our audience on Instagram is just women. And so I think it's really exciting to connect with you, who focuses more on fathers and dads, because, it takes two to tango in many ways, but we really want to reach those dads too, because dads have such an important role in all things parenting, but particularly birds and bees.
Yeah, and why do you think that? I mean, I genuinely, when you reflect on your audience, do you think that you mainly have women because you are women as presenters, or is that who's the most interested in this information and conversation?
It's interesting as you can kind of dissect your audience a bit on Instagram. If you go to the back end of Insights, it's really fascinating. They can tell you, where everybody is and ages and all that stuff. And it is for sure predominantly women and on our account. But what's interesting is, so when this started almost 40 years ago, Mary Flo, who is hopefully going to join us, she's having some technical difficulties, but hopefully she'll join us. But it was a speaking business only. Okay, so she would go around town speaking to groups of parents. And back then, when it started in the early 90s, it was really all women would go listen to her speak. And then she was speaking for years and years and years. I came on board 10 years ago and started training under her, and we would go all over the country, and we still do, speaking to parents, teaching this curriculum. And so one of the biggest things we've noticed over the past 10 years is the audience at our live events, where for many, many decades, it was all women, just moms would come. In the past 10 years, it was like 25% dads, to now it's like 50-50.
Whoa.
So
Wow.
It's been really encouraging, I think, for us. So our Instagram audience is not reflective of our live event, or it's not the same as our live event audience, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, that's fascinating to me. And I guess that makes a lot of sense to some degree. I think you build an audience and then you kind of keep getting fed to similar types of things on Instagram. So that, and then you also kind of what you can relate to visually, like you have your two women presenting these things. So it's easier for them to like buy into that. But at the same time, I do you think that the increase in men is due to more men being involved in parenting, or what's okay, that's it?
I think so. I mean, again, I can't speak for everyone, but I think generationally speaking, culturally speaking, I don't know, but the role of a father, I think, has changed a lot over the past 10, 15, 20 years. In a great way. I think dads are, like, I remember my kids are not babies anymore, but when they were babies, my mom, and I had a great dad, very involved dad. But even little things, my mom was like, wow, your husband's doing so much more of like the nitty gritty stuff, and your dad never did that stuff. And again, not because he was a bad dad or a lazy dad, it was just kind of, things have shifted where I think now dads are stepping up to take a lot more of the, parenting, shouldering some of the parenting stuff and kind of involved in some of the stuff more than they used to be. And again, not in like I don't know. I think obviously personalities come to play, but I think now as far as like parent education and discipline and parenting ideas, theology or philosophies, whatever, I think dads are much more engaged in those conversations with the moms. Now,
Sure.
obviously not always, but I think the role of a dad is much more hands-on now than it probably used to be. Would you
Yeah.
argue the same?
No, I totally agree. I mean, and I think that for me, I see the flip side of that is like, some people get frustrated with that because it's like, oh, dads tend to be the earners and now they also have to involve in the parenting. I'm like, you get the joy from that side of it. Like when you're more involved, you get to see the good, bad, and ugly. And that gives you so much ability to be present and actually take a lot from this experience of fatherhood. Like you hear so many fathers like reflecting on their fatherhood being like, I didn't spend enough time with them. And I'm like, that's the last thing we want, and I don't think it needs to fully flip flop in terms of like the dad does all the breastfeeding and it's like, no. Like we can still keep it as like, we have these roles that are often very shared, but some are very much geared towards the mother and others for the father. And that again, culturally and relationship will look different from thing to thing, but I love the continued involvement. And clearly my page is a similar one. It's fathers who care about this process and want to be better at it. And I guess based off of what you guys do you see a different role for fathers and mothers in the sex talk? Is there a difference in how those two parties, I guess, approach this?
So I would say short answer is no. So what we do at Birds and Bees is we really try to reach parents with young kids. So our target audience is parents with kids ages 1 through 10. And so one of our big sayings we say a lot is the talk is outdated. And I have little quote marks around the talk. But what we're trying to get rid of is this old notion of you don't talk about sex until one day at 12 or 13, mom or dad comes in your room, knocks on the door, says every single thing you've never wanted to know about sex, and then closes the door, maybe leaves you a book, and it's done. It's never spoken of again. And so that's very ineffective. So what we're trying to do is train parents with little kids in ways to have age-appropriate conversations and get rid of one talk, but replace it with multiple little talks over the years. Because the reality is when kids are little, that's when they're curious. And that's when they're asking questions. How'd that baby get in there? How's that baby getting out of there? Where do babies come from? They're really trying to figure out all these little things going on around them. And who are they asking? Us. Moms and dads. And so we say, when we get that question specifically is, well, who should answer the question? Should dad talk to boys? Should moms talk to daughters? We argue in these young years, particularly, whoever is asked the question should answer it. Because we want these conversations to be happening as natural as possible. We don't want it to be this conversation. The question comes up in the car and mom says, oh, well, let's talk to your dad when he gets home. Right. Because that all of a sudden kind of signals this like, well, that was weird.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not going to talk to him about that. Mom acted really weird. So we really encourage parents to answer the question, or if, somebody pulls a tampon out of the bathroom and says, Dad, what's this? We don't want dad to be like, don't touch it. Touch your mom. It's like, well, gosh, was that a bomb? What was that? And he doesn't have to get into this full crazy answer. We just say, oh, moms use that for periods. She can tell you more about it.
Yeah.
And keep it simple.
How do you navigate? Well, so I love your answer there. And I personally am very much of the mindset of speaking often about it, especially when it comes up. I don't need to bring it up or anything along those lines, but it comes up naturally as if you've been a parent, these things happen. But I don't personally, as a man, have any weirdness about it. Like I had very sex positive parents. I had a combo of like a Catholic mom and a hippie father. So I've got like extra free on one side and a bit of a more rigid framework on the other. But I was given a lot of, if I had a question, it would just be answered like pretty flatly. So I've never had any hangups around it. Personally, and with my kids, I don't either. Like I know you have some things where you talk about families have different values and things along those lines, but, I guess that my question now comes into just with that as the context for me. You talk a lot about, having parents not push, but have these conversations so their kids can take on board their values around it, whatever culturally or whatever their backgrounds might be. But how much do you have parents examine why they have the values that they have? And how important is that in this larger conversation?
Well, that's a great question. So the Birds and Bees curriculum, we have the speaking events that we still do all over the country because live events are fun and we really enjoy engaging with parents in that way. a couple years ago, about 5 years ago, we recorded it all, and that has now become the online course, which is what we really our main resource. Anyways, both of these things have our curriculum, and it's about 6 steps. And the first one is to encourage parents to create their family message, is what we call it. And that doesn't involve your kids at all. And it really kind of goes back to the question you just answered of, you need to figure out as a parent, if you're parenting together, or if you're a single parent or whatever you are, to really figure out and ask the question, what do I believe about sex? And so sometimes it's like, well, what do I tell my kids? And I'm quick to say, well, I don't know what you believe, or I don't know where you stand on this. So if you're coming from this point of view, I would say this. If you're coming from this point of view, I would say this, because this is a very personal topic. And so your family message essentially boils down to, what do I want my kids to know about sex if they're growing up in my home? Sure. And so often, and for some families, that's going to say, well, I want them to know it's a gift from God. Some families are going to say, I want them to know it has to be, mutual consent and respect for someone you really love. I want some kids to know it's something just for adults that is a way of showing affection. Like, everyone's going to have different definitions of what this is, different boundaries around it. But what we really encourage parents to do is ask that question, what do I want them to know about sex? Because so often our innate desire as parents is to make sure we have all this information pretty ready. Sorry.
Readily available?
Thank you. I'm
there
like,
you go.
You talk all the time and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't even get the word out. Thank you. So when you have that information ready to go, I'll switch it up. Typically what comes out is our defensive strategies, right? Well, I know what they're not going to do. I know who they're not going to date, what they're not going to watch. I know what classes they're not going to take at school, or what forums they're going to go to. We're not reading this book. We're not saying these words. And we really encourage parents to take a step back and say, okay, well, what do you want them to know? And to answer that, you have to go back to the question you asked. It's like, as a parent, you have to decide, well, what do I believe about sex? What is the purpose behind it? What are the boundaries I want around it? What kind of tone do I want to have in our house when this topic comes up? What kind of vocabulary words am I comfortable saying? How would I define what a healthy understanding of sex is? And so these are kind of like the pre-homework you have to do as a parent to kind of figure out, okay, what do I believe? And then once you have that pretty established, you can figure out, okay, how can I become a proactive parent? Because the old way of doing things is just to react, right? We have no plan, and our plan is to really just avoid. And then the questions come up at the back seat, or, getting onto the highway whenever it's like the worst time possible. And the question comes up and we kind of panic and we just react, And so what we want you to do is step back and kind of have a plan, know where you're going with these conversations, and then be proactive and look for opportunities to move towards your children with this information. How a baby is born, how things reproduce, body parts, body boundaries, birth, babies. I mean, there's so many conversations you can be having proactively if you're prepared.
I agree. I think that being prepared is huge, and examining your own values around it. Do you have any strategies for parents who have genuine hangups around, like, they've got a lot of shame centered around sex, and they're sitting there being like, I think my kid should feel shame around their bodies. Because I know it's probably diplomatic to be open-minded about, like, dude, you should just pass on your values. But a lot of people have some really not closely examined values. Is there a strategy people can do for, like, examining their own values and seeing what's good, like, not good, but, like, I don't know, like, I want people to look at these things closely.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's important to be thoughtful about this. I think it's kind of what you're saying. Part of our course has like this workbook that walks you through a lot of discussion questions. And we have lots of questions that kind of walk you through, like, reflective a little bit of, like, how did you first, for adults only, but, like, how did you first learn about sex? Who was the primary educator, or what was the primary educator about sex? How do you want your kids to understand? So all these, like, kind of reflective questions. But I think what's important to understand is this. I want to acknowledge that there's a lot of baggage around this topic. And I don't say that lightly, or I don't say that to dismiss this, because it's true. And I think a lot of people, when these conversations come up or these words come up, I mean, it's like whoosh, all this baggage comes up with it. And I think what's important to remember, for parents is that these conversations with your kids do not need to be attached to all of this baggage. Again, I'm not dismissing that. I think it's something that should be worked through, and depending on what your personal situations are, talk to somebody, maybe talk to someone professionally, but really kind of work through that. But I think it's important to remember that these conversations with your kids are no longer about you and your past. It's about them and their future. And those can be separated. And so I think sometimes people say, well, I don't want my kids to do what I did, but I have no right to talk to them in this way. It's like, well, no, these are two separate things now, right?
Totally.
So we are, this is no longer about you and your past. It's about them and their future. And how can you set them up for a healthier future if maybe that's not one you had? And so I think we need to, again, acknowledge if there is baggage and look for help, because I think it's really important to figure that out and to work through that. So I'm not trying to dismiss that, because there's a lot of baggage with, addictions or abuse. I mean, it's heavy stuff that I think should not be dismissed. However, it can stop here and it doesn't need to be pushed to your child. You can have conversations with your children that are really only surrounded about them and their future.
Yeah. I mean, that's awesome. That's really good advice. And I think essentially what I heard you say is that, one, you make people reflect a bit and actually think about it and like have this conversation with themselves about like, what do you really think? Because often we don't ask ourselves these questions. A lot of people just move through life and we never examine that any closer. So first and foremost, do a bit of that reflection about what you really do want them to know, because there's some beautiful and amazing and very real mechanical things associated with this.
Right.
And then in addition to that, like, your stuff doesn't need to be their stuff. This is just a separate conversation. This is a whole new chapter. This is awesome. I mean, like that, then you don't have to bring in any of that. And I think I hear you saying also, like, actually practice this conversation, because if you aren't accustomed to saying, well, a penis goes in a vagina and then there is an ejaculation and then, and it actually feels pretty good, but it's later in life. And at the same time, and then there's an egg, and then there's it can be one of those things that you really do stumble over those words. I know I've had the conversation a number of times now with the same kid, and I'm sure you've experienced this and you talk about this, I'm sure, but like the first time they ask it and maybe you go, they'll keep probing, but then as soon as you finish, like even stuff is like, well, yeah. So you and mom do that? Yeah, we've done that. We do that. And that's the case. And they go, yeah. And they're they just go, oh, okay. And then they move on. Like they don't have the framework for weirdness that adults do. So and then it just like you said, it's this like kind of drip. And like just for the analogy for people who haven't followed you yet on Instagram, they've got this thing they talk about. Rather than having the talk, it's like you're continually dripping information around that and having many small talks. And the analogy I love that you used was, it's like if you've got a sponge that has no water in it, the second that it hits any water, it's going to absorb that water really, really quickly. And if you imagine the kid's brain and their understanding of sex as that sponge, then if you have no water in it, like no conversation around it at all, the second they get exposed at school or randomly online or in a movie, then it's just going to eat that information up in a way and really saturate that sponge. Versus if you've had these small talks over and over and over again, then that sponge is saturated. It's filled with water. So when more water drips on top, it just kind of like sheds off or just slightly dilutes whatever's in the sponge, versus being the thing that holds their entire attention. So I love that analogy. I think it's perfect. And I love how you go about that. So good job.
Well, you did a great job recapping. Way to go. Go ahead. I just think it's important for parents to realize that little by little, right? These are not a one and done. Like that approach is not effective. And just to your point, you've had the same conversation with the same son multiple times. Yeah. These are building blocks, and that's like the drip, drip, drip approaches. It's not, oh my gosh, I did it, I'm done. It's like, no, you'll do it, and then you'll do it again, and you'll talk again. And the nuances build as your child grows and matures. And when they're little, I also think you said this, and I think it's important to reiterate, it's like when you're having these conversations, 10 and under, it's not sensual. They're not thinking of it. They're not absorbing the dangers and pleasures associated with sex. They're just kind of like, what? Oh, okay. It's facts, and so there's protection and power in these conversations of like, you are giving them all this information And now I'm seeing it with my own kids because we're getting to these fun ages, but it's like,
What ages?
um, everyone's like half, so 12 and a half, 10 and a half, 7 and a half.
Okay.
Um, now that we're in these ages, it's like, I am so grateful we have this foundation, because it's like, now we're stepping into some of the more nuanced conversations.
Sure.
We can talk a bit more about some of the movies that we see. It's like, well, we don't believe this, or I think see how that could not go so well for you if this happens, so it's like we can see these conversations because we have this foundation to build upon. But it would be really difficult if all of a sudden I had said nothing to my 12 and a half, almost 13-year-old daughter, and all of a sudden at 13, I'm like, sit down. If I got something to tell you, it's like, well, now and then part of this, and we talk about this a lot too, is not only is the drip, drip, drip effective as far as like an information taken approach, it's also really effective for establishing this pattern of trust and communication. And that is something we really want to empower parents to become the experts. And that doesn't happen overnight, right? We want this to happen, years and years of build up and build up. Your kid knows ultimately they are comfortable talking to you about this. Oh, my dad, he always says that kind of stuff. Or, oh yeah, he said that word 1,000,000 times. Or, let me ask my mom. Yeah. That is kind of what we want to establish. Is sometimes we refer to it as like the loving authority. We want you to have established yourself as the expert on this topic. And again, that doesn't happen overnight. And quite frankly, 13-year-olds don't think you're an expert in anything. Sure. And so if you start at 13, you're kind of missing some of that. Yeah. So we really encourage this early and often drip, drip, drip approach, because they're asking questions, they believe what you say, and they're not taking in this information in a sensual way. It's just kind of facts.
Hello, fathers. I apologize for interrupting the episode, but I just got to do a little bit of housekeeping. Number one, I have retreats this summer. I've got 3 of them set up right now for fathers. If you want to come up to my property, do an off-grid retreat, and really just reconnect and reset where your mindset is at, then that's the thing for you. So check that out. I have some spots left, and would love to see you there. Secondly, we've got BDE.coach is launching January 1st. So if this is after January 1st, it'll be live. And essentially that is an accountability tool that I created that I think is amazing. It's free to use for just one sort of goal, but if you have multiple goals, it's $9.99 per goal. And it essentially creates this kind of action that you're going to take, and then every day is holding you accountable to that. And if you're not doing the thing that you said you were going to do, it's going to shoot you a message and say, hey, why didn't you do this thing? And then you're going to have a quick little interaction with it. There is also an option in that tool to connect with a real coach. Specifically right now, it's just me. So that process is going to be a more expensive one because I'm only going to be taking on a max of 20 people. It's just too much for me to do otherwise. But there is that accountability tool. It does exist. It's free for the first thing, and then it's $9.99 if you wanted to use multiple goals. And then lastly, if you wanted to check out the Fathers Guild YouTube channel, I would love for you to go there and check that out. I'm putting out as much content as I can to help fathers and help men be better versions of themselves. Again, thank you for being a part of the Fathers Guild and just paying attention to the content in general. I'm honored to have you here, and back to the show. I'm going to not challenge you, but I'm going to pose something forward to you. I think that one of a big disservice we can do to our kids is talk about stuff that we don't fully understand, or we have a very particular vision of, but is not per se the truth. It's our perspective on it. And I think politics is one of those things. Mm-hmm. I think sex and sexuality can be one of those things. I think religion is one of those things. And I think, in my perspective, if you say this is how it is, mm-hmm. then later in life, when your child finds out there's another way, mm-hmm. you lose trust with them, and you lose authority, and you lose connection, because you've framed something in a way that's so rigid that they can immediately just go, I see 6 other points that prove mm-hmm. otherwise. Mm-hmm. Whereas and I think that I'm wondering if you have a different perspective on that, because I think based off of my vision of what you do, you have a religious background, or you have a religious perspective
point of view.
Point of view. And some of the things that you say fit into the well, this is how it is. And I could see, if I was your child and I became 18 and was like, there's other ways about this. You seem narrow-minded and rigid to me. I would lose respect. So do you have any thoughts on that?
So I think that's a great question, and I think that as parents, that's something we could all be thinking through, of like, how can we be an authority figure, yet also allow them space as they grow up to figure out the world on their own, right? That's kind of the balance I think you're talking about. And so the first step we talked about at Birds and Bees is for parents to create their family message. What do I want my kid to know about sex, right? And we've established that that's going to sound very different for every family. And to your point, for my family, we are Christians. And so I am taking the approach of, I believe sex is for marriage. And that is the message that I'm going to share with my children. Now, they're not going to get very far before they realize, well, they're not married. How come they have a baby? Or however near? So it's not so much that I'm trying to keep this rigid thing of like, this is the way it is. I think that's where you're careful with your language, right? And then part of Christianity is we're all sinners and we live in a broken world and we all are messing up and nothing is beyond redemption, right? So that's part of the bigger story. And so it's more of like, this is the way it works best, or this is the way it was intended to be, but it doesn't always work like this. And sure, every family looks different. And so this is the way we think it should be, but we live in a broken world. And so I think for my children and my message, that's kind of the approach we're taking. And I would hope that that doesn't present this rigidity and this fear for my kids. And so it would just be more of like, well, this is what we believe and this is why, but this is also the reality around us. And again, that's not to say that like if you choose X, Y, or Z, forget it, Right. I don't think that's necessarily what we're trying to do, but I think it's kind of saying, well, I think you can have beliefs that you teach your children and also know that they're going to realize people believe other things
right
in this world. And I think that's okay. I think you can set your, we say this phrase a lot is beauty and boundaries. Here's something that's really good. And these are the boundaries that we believe are around it. So for my family, that boundary is marriage. Well, every family has different boundaries. And so kind of letting them know that exists, I think takes away some of that shock that you're referring to later, or like, what? No, they said this was it. This is the only way. And now they're wrong because look at all these other people. So I think if you establish it as more of like, hey, this is what we believe and this is what we're teaching, but this is true. This is what other people are doing too. I think you're taking away some of that shock that you're kind of talking about as they get older. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm of the almost exactly mindset what you said is like, here's what I believe and here's why I believe it, but here's what some other people believe and here's why they believe it and here's why I don't think that's right. But we do get a freedom of choice in that, and I'm gonna live by the values that I say, and I'm gonna present that and do those things versus just saying like that's wrong. I'm just gonna go, well, here's what I believe and here's why I believe it. And I think what do you think? Like, what do you think in that scenario?
And I think that's healthy for our kids to see, because if you have a conversation, and I think that's where some people in all extremes can take things, right? It's like, this is the way it is no matter what. Well, kids look around and like, well, that's not right, because look at our neighbors. Look at these people across the street. Look at our cousin. I mean, there's lots of different ways to do things around here, So I think if you present it in a rigid way, but I think everything you just said, I think is what I would say too, is like, this is what we believe. It's okay to have values and your own beliefs and boundaries and teach this to your children. But I think it's also, I think people get in a habit or in a pattern of just doing that. And I think that's where maybe some damage can come later, or resentment or distrust can come later. Because I think sometimes people fear that if you expose them to something outside of your beliefs, it's going to negate your beliefs. Sure. And I think that's not necessarily true. Ignorance is not the same as innocence. That's something we say a lot. Totally. But I think as a parent, to have the understanding like, hey, this is or the confidence really, like, this is what we believe. And this is what other people believe. I'm not shaken by their beliefs because this is what I believe. And to kind of present that in a confident way to your children, I think lets them feel a bit grounded in that. And I think sometimes parents can parent out of fear a little bit of like, well, I'm not going to tell them about anything else because I don't want them to be swayed. This is it. This is the way it is. And they get out there and like, what? And then to your point, there's kind of like this distrust of like, I didn't know that. Are you
Yeah.
kidding? You told me this the whole time? Like, and so I think it's more of like an honesty approach, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Yeah. And well, I think I agree with that. And I think that establishes you as a greater authority because
Hmm.
you're just a human. You're using your experience, you're doing all these things. And I think that the beauty of that is like you will build that level of trust. And I think it'll be longer standing. And I think there's probably extremes is like not saying anything and not talking is probably, we can all agree, not great. And then you go like saying that there's one and only way. That's better because you're at least you're telling them something, but like you're kind of like, oh, but there's more that you could do, and being like, okay, well, here's why I think what I think, and here's my supporting evidence, and here's all this stuff, but there are other things out there. Like it just makes it I don't know. I think there's a longer standing healthy relationship there personally.
And I totally agree with you. And I think that what I want people listening today to hear too is like everything you just said, I totally agree with. That doesn't all have to be said in a car ride with your 12-year-old.
No.
You know? But I think it's like we got to shake that off and realize when they're really young, you can use those years to really establish your voice. This is what we believe. This is what we believe sex is for. And then as they get older and they have a bit more understanding, be like, they might ask about other people or other situations or something's going on in a movie. And you can speak into that, and say, yeah, that's right, because this is what they think. And then as they get older here, it's like, so just to give yourself the understanding or the framework of like, this is like most things in parenting. It's not a one and done conversation, but to not walk away thinking, okay, well, I want to teach them that this is what I believe sex is, but also I want them to understand that everyone else is going to have different opinions. It's like, those don't have to be all one conversation, right? We want you to speak the truth, walk with your child, be, act loving towards all those around you, and teach your child that this is, we live in a world where everyone's going to have different thoughts. Families look different, beliefs are different, values are different. And that's, but this is what we believe. And so I think just to understand that those conversations also happen over time and also build as your child's foundation builds and as their maturity builds.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that I mean, the conversations are one thing to me, but the living it is another.
For
I
sure.
think the dissonance between what you say and what you do is really, really hard to reconcile as a human trying to take you seriously or live under you. And that's something I try to,
People.
what was that?
They'll see how you treat people.
Yes, exactly.
People who are different from you. And so it's one thing to say this is what we believe and be a jerk to everybody else. It's like, well, that's not very helpful,
Yeah.
And so I think to your point, they see, so much as caught rather than taught, they say.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. Almost 100%. I have you made a post a little bit ago talking about that your family or your kids are essentially all at the developmental stage of your oldest kid.
Yeah.
And I recently had like 2 days before experienced a very similar thing happen, or not a similar thing, a scenario that was very akin to that. And it was, I was in the car and we were listening to a book. We listened to a lot of books on tape, some more appropriate than others. And we were listening to a fantasy book called The Way of Kings. And it's generally a pretty mild book. The writer, Brandon Sanderson, he's pretty straightforward in his writing. He doesn't go too romantic-y kind of world. But in it, there was a scenario going down where this guy was walking through a war camp, and a woman got thrown out of a tent, and the guy came out after her and was like calling her a whore, like you're just a whore sort of deal, because she was a camp follower, and then there was the standing up for it, and there was all the stuff in there, but the word was there, and my 13-year-old's like, "What's a whore?" And I'm like,
Shut the door.
well, yeah, I was like, okay, what's a whore? And like in that moment, I had to be like, a whore is an entertainer. And he was like, oh, okay. And that fit the
Good answer.
context. What was that?
It's a good answer.
Thank you. But then I have to go back and I have to circle back with him because we've had conversations about sex and intimacy and all of the things. So I'm going to have to circle back because we were in the car with the whole family.
Yeah.
So I couldn't be like, a whore is somebody who gets paid to have sex with other people. One of the oldest professions that exists. And there's a lot of nuance there because some people do. And it's like, I personally would not go that route, but it's happened. And like, But I find that to be a really interesting dynamic as you move forward with children, is like, like that, everything from like the shows that they watch to the books that they read to the podcast that they listen to, whatever it is, like it's just all these younger kids are trickled in like at the at much younger ages. Right.
Totally. And that is, so if you're not familiar with the post, but so a phrase we say a lot is, your family is the age of your oldest child and everyone keeps up. And that is just, I mean, some people would argue that, like, no, we keep our kids young. It's like, whatever, everyone's gonna have a different approach. But generally speaking, when your baby is 7, he's doing different things at 7 than your firstborn did. You know, that firstborn at 7 went to bed at 7, never saw the light of day, read books, baths, all this stuff. And then to your point, your 7-year-old, or I'm not sure how old your kids are, but was probably in that car listening to an audiobook with the word horror, you know? And that's the way things are, right? My 7-year-old, my 7-year-old, I look at him and I'm like, oh my gosh, your life is so different than when my firstborn baby girl was 7. I mean, because we had a baby house, you know, and now we have almost a 13-year-old house. But you did, like, script by script what we would encourage parents to do in that situation.
Yes.
So way to go, Pat.
Oh, I'll take it.
Trophy for you, because we often are asked, okay, we want these conversations to happen naturally and be the loving authority, and we want to be a safe place for our kids to come with a question. So what happens if somebody asks a question in front of all the siblings? So we always say, answer to the youngest person in the room or in the car, and then circle back to the older kid later. So, I mean, 100% nailed it, because he gave an age-appropriate answer for everybody. He didn't stumble over his words or be weird of like, we'll talk about that later. Your brother here. You know, it's like, you're cool, no big deal, entertainer, and then circle back to the oldest child later and said, you know, that word you mentioned in the car, well, it actually has to do with sex, you know, and whatever. So I think that, way to go, 100%, because again, you're still a safe place for your kids to answer questions. And that's something, or ask their questions, because I think you have obviously set up a pattern of that trust and communication where your oldest son feels free to ask questions like that, and not be like, if time and time again you ask questions growing up and your parents are like, don't say that, or nothing, it means nothing, don't ask that a question again, you know, like that kind of stuff, that they're just shut down, and pretty soon learn, I'm not asking my dad questions, you know? So for your 13-year-old to confidently say, hey, what does that word mean, knowing it could mean anything, he feels very safe with you. And that to me means like you've done a really good job over these years, these early and often drip, drip, drip talks, because he knows like, oh, he'll answer my questions. So that car example is a great example of lots of points we hit on at Birds and Bees, but really of just being a safe place for your kids and their curious questions, because they could go to a lot of places with their questions these days, and we couldn't necessarily guarantee what they're going to find elsewhere.
Yeah. I mean, I guess my question then would be, strategy wise, what do you do for people to, like, what are the main recommendations you have around, if you were going to say, and maybe this is too controversial a question, but if you were going to say device usage and what you do expose your kids, because I know it's different from family to family, podcast, like whatever it is.
Yeah.
What do you have recommendations for families for, like, what you wouldn't expose them to, or what you wouldn't give them, or what's an age for, like, is there age appropriate things that you talk about, like
for like devices or for like specific shows and stuff?
Well, I just like, maybe my question should be more geared towards you, Megan. What did you do to raise your kids so that you could kind of, to some degree, control the narrative around these conversations?
Well, that's a big question, Pat. But I would say now, in line with, let's go with screens, maybe.
Sure. We can stay there. Yes. We're
going to stay there. We can go bigger in a second. I think I'm in it. So proof's in the pudding, right? But this strategy that I am using in teaching has been around for decades. And so I feel very confident in the generation of parents ahead of me that have felt very confident in this way of teaching their kids, not because it gives them a gold star of a pure child. That's not the goal here. You know, the goal is for a child to have a healthy understanding of sex and a comfortable place to ask questions with their mom and dad, right? So that's what we're trying to do, not be like, oh, he never did this, or she never saw that, or whatever.
Sure.
Anyways, so for my kids personally and screens, I think what's helpful, and this is, I mean, obviously with my line of work, I think pornography is pretty negative. I'll just say that. I think pornography exposure is happening at much younger age. The statistic now is age 11. Some studies say younger. I mean, I think at this point, most parents are aware that this is a danger, right, of the online world. And it can lead to addiction and all this really unhealthy patterns. So to get ahead of that, because there's also really interesting statistics that this day and age, kids are likely to be exposed by accident as they are on purpose, just because of the way technology is everywhere and all these things. So with my young kids, even like as young as like 3 or 4, we're not like totally screen free around here. It's not like we say, oh, we don't watch TV in our home. We only wooden blocks. Like that's not our life.
That was pretty funny. I appreciate your crunchy jab there. That was good.
Well, everybody kind of wants to be crunchy a little bit, it appeals.
I hope everyone wants to be a little crunchy because there's some amazing things.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we love being outdoors. I feel like I'm crunchy light. I mean,
crunchy light.
But we live in a big city, and so I feel like we're average Joes. I don't know. We're not like addicted to screens by any means, but and they play outside and ride their bikes free, and so we're doing some of it. Okay.
Yeah.
But I would say when they're little, even if you're turning the TV on to watch a show, you have the remote, and that's the little phrase like, "Oh, mommy's gonna type in the password," because we got to be really careful with what we see on screens. And just a little phrase like that, just to pose this idea that there are some good pictures out there, but there are also some bad pictures. So we got to be really careful with what we see. And that phrase right there can be repeated multiple times to really young kids, because it's essentially the same type of approach you're taking if they're in the kitchen, and you're cooking on the stove and you're saying, "Oh, sweetheart, be careful. Mommy's cooking. That stove's really hot. We got to be really careful when the stove's on." Okay. You don't say that one time. You don't sit them down and say, "Sweetheart, I want to talk to you about 3rd-degree burns." Really?
Wait till they're 14 at those. Like that's when you do it.
Exactly. Sit down. This is really bad. Let me show you some pictures. You don't want this.
Ooh,
So like we're taking this approach in everything. Crossing the street. We talk about it every time they cross the street. We invite our community into it. Hey, I got to get the baby out of the car. Can you hold his hand across the street? Look both ways. This is just kind of a danger in their day-to-day lives, and we talk about it. And so I think we've got to start teaching or treating pornography in that same way with our young kids. This is not to be a panic and have sit down, emotionally driven conversations of like, "Sweetie, I have to talk to you about something really,
right,
really dark." It's like, no, just want to be careful around screens. And obviously those conversations build as they get older, and we talked a little bit, as your kids get older, like, I understand, like, because some kids are curious and will Google things and land somewhere they're not supposed to land, but to kind of say, I understand your curiosity. That's a normal thing, and so to not shame them. We don't want to shame these kids of like, "I can't believe you're growing up." It's like, hey, I understand it's okay to be, if you're curious, but this is not healthy for a lot of reasons, or this is like not really a good thing for X, Y, and Z. And again, to kind of acknowledge this is not a bad thing. This is just a bad way to kind of direct this.
Sure.
And so I think for screens, for my family, we've been very open about that. Now, as my daughter's getting older and, "Oh, Mom, I want a phone. I want a phone. Everyone has a phone but me," all these things.
That's
talking
okay.
to her. Exactly. Like, I'm okay with this. But like having conversations with them of like, this is why I'm really careful about this. Or there's just some bad things on there, or just even modeling. Like screens are fine. My whole job's on a screen.
Same.
But like it can also be bad. It's and not necessarily the bad things you see, but the things that you miss in real life. And so Dad and I are just trying to set an example for you of like how to create balance. We don't want you to have to deal with that at 12 or 13, And so it's just little conversations. But the pornography piece, I would say, again, early and often.
Yeah.
We really want to
give them pornography early and often.
Yeah. Thank
Is that
you.
what you said? That's what I'm going to take. That's the soundbite I heard. Birds and Bees says, "Give them pornography early and often."
Early and often. Thank you so much, Pat. And that's going to be like the catchphrase on the Instagram post. So that's
porn early and often. That'll be the main one.
This will be really good. Let me clarify that talking to them about it, because what happens is, God forbid they see something or they see something by accident or someone shows, you could be a crunchy family and a friend could say, "Hey, look at this," and so it's just prevalent. And so if our kids have had no conversations, we're kind of leaving them out to dry.
Totally.
Because they might think, "Well, I don't know what I just saw, but I'm kind of curious."
Yeah.
But I also feel kind of bad.
Of
So
course
then
you're curious.
It's like the secret shame cycle, right?
Yeah.
And the secrecy is where real problems can start.
Yes.
That's where things can get really dark and heavy for a young kid. And so what we are trying to do is kind of turn the lights on and just say, hey, this is out there. If you see it, here's what we're going to do. And so then, like I said, if, God forbid your child sees something, they can say, oh, this is what my dad was telling me about. And he told me, you know what, we're going to turn, run, or tell an adult, or, whatever your plan is. So when they get there, we kind of preempt these situations with our kids to protect them, or we preempt these situations to prepare them. So it's like, oh yeah, this is what my dad told me. I'm not going to look at that. Or my mom always says, we don't look at pictures of people's private parts. Okay, these are like, and you can see how these conversations build as your child matures. So It's not like you're talking to your 14-year-old about a bad picture. These conversations build as your child matures.
Right. I'm wrestling with I have a 13-year-old boy. I have 4 sons. I have a 13-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 3-year-old. So they're all boys. I'm a boy, and I was exposed to pornography relatively young, but it was very much tamer than what is currently out there. And I've had a lifelong relationship with pornography and those battles and being like, where does this sit? What is it? Like, how does it all work? But again, I've had a very sex positive life where it was like, it never sat in a place of shame for me. Whereas I know people who are totally disassociated from intimacy because all they know it is like hiding in a room and looking at pornography. Yeah. But I'm wrestling with this concept of like, okay, as my boys age into having these massive surges of testosterone and really moving into being very curious about these things, is there a safe route into it? Like, honestly, not a safe route into pornography, but like, what exposure would be appropriate? Like, do I hide? Because like, there's at the local antique shop, they got a whole stack of Playboys, like, and they're like 1990, 1980 Playboys, like even in the 70s. And I'm like, what if I hide one of those around the house, like, and he finds the Playboy, like, or like an old Victoria's Secret magazine, like the same upbringing that I had, but like in a much tamer way, because he's going to transition into this curiosity in a very meaningful way. So I'm wrestling with that as like, I don't think that's the greatest idea, but it's way better than him just logging online and having that search, like.
And that's where, I can't tell you what to do. These are your children. So I'm going to let you take that journey. But I think what's important to remember, I think really I want to pull out a fact you just said, is that, and this is for dads. I'm not a dad, so I'm not going to tell you all how to think or feel. But what's happening today and what boys are seeing today is very different than those catalogs or whatever from yesteryear, right? And so I think that's important because I think sometimes parents can get into this adage of like, oh, I did that when I was younger, or like, oh, that was the same thing here, and kind of realize like, oh, I don't think it is. And so just kind of be aware of that. And then 2, I would say this would be a conversation, and this, I have to be careful with my words just because like I'm a mother, I'm a woman, right? And
I won't take any offense. I think you expressing your it's fine. Say it how you want to say it.
So I would say men are wired differently than women.
No. How dare you? How dare you? No, I firmly believe that too. Okay. Keep going.
So I think if you are married, this is a conversation you should be having together. Because I think, and I have a daughter and I have 2 boys. And so as I'm raising these 2 boys, not knowing what it's like to be a teenage boy, I'm going to really rely heavily on my husband to say, okay, what was that like? What boundaries do you think are appropriate to put in place? What kind of conversations do you want to put in place? And that's really helpful. Now, not all moms have that. My husband was raised by a single mom, and I think he turned out great. So this is not to say this is the way it has to be. But I think in this situation, talk to your wife and kind of say, what are you comfortable with? What do you want to draw the line? Help her understand, how this works. And then be like, what tolerance level are you okay with? It's like, what? I don't think that's appropriate. I don't think this is healthy or whatever it is. And so I think I would just be aware of like what's out there now. And again, it all goes back to, what do you believe about sex? Right? And so I think you have to ask yourself that, what do I believe? And you could argue, if you have a belief over here that it is not always self-serving, maybe these type of behaviors are creating a pattern that's not going to be helpful for you in the long run. And so I think those are conversations I would have with my boys of like, I understand the way you were wired and the way that your desires are, but if we're, again, to me, a healthy understanding of sex would be a lifelong thing, right? In a committed marriage. Well, that's not always going to be like, I want it, I get it. You know, that's not the way it works. When you're in a relationship with a person, right? And so just a more of like, and these are big, big, big conversations and big, big, big ideas that aren't going to really relate or translate to a 14-year-old boy. Okay. So I'm fully aware.
But this is good. This is good. But this is meaningful to me. Like, I think this is good.
But I think that's helpful for kids to see. I think sometimes it's healthy, you know, when parents ask all the time, like, well, what if my kids, you know, or 14-year-olds like, well, do you and dad do that? I think sometimes I don't think it's bad for teenagers in particular to think sex is something that old people do too. You know, it is.
Sure.
Or like, the sex is not.
Pop culture tells them something very different, but yes.
Exactly. And that's where I think that's part of the healthy understanding our kids has as they get older is changing the narrative. No, this is a lifelong intimate act of selflessness, one could argue, you know? And so not like to dismiss pleasure and all the other stuff. I'm not saying that. But it's more of like, well, that goes all the way back to what do you believe sex is? Now, someone might be listening and they're like, what? That's crazy. Sex is for me and whatever. Then your approach to these conversations is going to sound very different.
Well, you need to grow up first. But then, sorry, that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah. So I think it's such a nuanced conversation and it's going to get so personal. And part of, I mean, for a billion reasons, we really focus on younger kids. But it's because you're allowed to have, or from a educational point of view, you can have cast a wider net, I guess, for these conversations. If you're dealing with the basic biology, your family's core beliefs, reproduction, seeds and eggs, birth, babies, consent, all these conversations that you can have to young kids are fairly black and white and fairly universal. Things get more nuanced as you get older because it all really goes back to, well, what do you believe? You know, so it's like, well, how do I deal with pornography with my 14-year-old son? It's like, well, I don't know because I don't know what you believe about sex. I don't know what you're teaching him. I don't know what you believe. I don't know what your relationship is with sex. You know, so it's like as kids get older, things become way more nuanced. And so then I think it really just depends. It just depends on like, what do you believe about sex? Yeah. And so again, not to say that, but I would argue that you should keep talking. Your answer might sound different from mine if you're listening or vice versa, but figure out a way that you can speak into this in your voice and your values, because I think that's helpful for them to hear from the adults in their life, especially as they're getting older, that sex isn't just something kids do in high school movies. Yeah. You know, or it's like we're doing our kids a disservice if they think that pornography is reality.
Well, I think one of the things that you said there was all amazing stuff, but one of the things that you're talking about is basically like looking at the outcome that you want. Like what is a high functioning, happy, joyous adult in a great relationship? What do they believe about sex? You know, what do they believe about service? What do they believe about and if that's not you, project that. What would someone who's crushing life, what would their perception of it be? Now, what actions now can I do to have someone have that mindset? And that goes with all parenting things to me. It's like, well, I'm not trying to make a good kid. I'm trying to make a good adult. So the choices I make are going to be centered around what is that person that I believe is going to, and a good adult is not one that fits into society necessarily. It's one that does well on their own, has a good time in life, you know, like enjoys their time and loves people and service. And I guess that value structure will be different based off of your upbringing and your culture. But yeah, anyway, I hear you saying that and I love that. And I don't want to take up too much of your time.
Gosh. But these are interesting questions. And I think if anything, I hope that this was thought provoking for parents, because I think, you know, if you really want to take a deep dive into what we do, follow us on Instagram. We share tons of talking tips for parents with young kids. If you want the whole shebang, we have an online course. I can give you a code for a discount.
Yes. Listeners, you get a discount to the online course. Go take the course. It's amazing.
Yeah, do it. But if anything, I hope this is just thought-provoking, you know, because I think for parents, typically the approach to this topic is avoidance and dread. And to your point of like, how much more fruitful could this conversation be if you think of it as I'm raising someone else's husband,
Totally.
I'm raising someone else's wife, whatever. It's like, or adult and a functioning adult in society, who has a word that I think doesn't go hand in hand with sex a lot is like respect.
Yeah.
Or
it should go
reverence.
hand in hand. Reverence and
know?
respect and devotion, like all
You
three of
know,
these things. Absolutely.
Totally. And so respect towards the person for sure, but almost I think sometimes I think about this of like reverence of sex as a whole, just in the way you're talking about it.
Yeah.
What jokes are you doing and taking part in? What funny memes are you sending to people? What kind of banter is happening? It's like, are you having reverence for this? And if you aren't, and that doesn't bother you, so be it. But if you are, and you're thinking, oh, maybe I should have more respect around this topic, then like I challenge you to do so and see how that translates to your children as they are growing up and what kind of man you're raising, what kind of woman you're raising. Because I think we are really letting the culture have a lot of weight around this topic and shaping so much of this. And I would really push back to parents and say, speak up. Because I think kids really need to hear our voice as well. Because what's happening in the movies is not necessarily what's happening for people who've been married for 45 years.
Absolutely. I think that's a fantastic place to close it up. Do you and find you on as the Birds and the Bees on Instagram? Yeah. Where else is the website?
Birds-bees.com.
Birds-bees.com. And where do you guys, are all your speaking engagements on there too?
We kind of just share them on Instagram as they become available. It just depends on if the event hosting wants it to be open to the public, we will share that. And sometimes, like a school will host and they just want it to be for their parents. So we don't post all of them, but if they are public ones, we will share them on our Instagram.
Awesome. And that's great. And anything else you want to leave anyone with?
You can do it.
Hell.
I would just say, you got this. Your kids, the world is shouting and they need to hear from you too. So start talking, keep talking, figure out what you believe about sex and keep talking.
Awesome.